She'd been answering to a dead woman's nickname for 7 years, and she didn't even know it. It hit her on a Tuesday, of all days. Not in some dramatic, rain-soaked confrontation, not through a lipstick stain on a collar or a hotel receipt left in a pocket. It came from a barista in a coffee shop, 3 blocks from her apartment. A college kid with a nose ring who squinted at her and said, "Oh wow, you look just like the girl in that photo, Serena, right? The one Mr. Chen keeps on his phone." Vivian had smiled politely, the way she always did when strangers said strange things. She'd taken her coffee. She'd walked outside, and then she'd stood on the sidewalk for a full 90 seconds, perfectly still, while the entire architecture of her marriage quietly collapsed inside her chest. Serena, she knew that name. Of course she knew that name. Serena was Tyler's college girlfriend, the one who died in a car accident the year before Vivian met him. He told her about it on their 3rd date, eyes red, voice cracking, the kind of vulnerability that makes a 24-year-old woman think, "I can heal him." She'd held his hand across the table and said, "You don't have to carry that alone anymore." What a generous, stupid thing to say, because now, standing outside that coffee shop with lukewarm coffee burning through the paper cup, Vivian was doing the math she'd never thought to do before. The nickname he'd given her, Viv, she'd always thought it was just a shortening of Vivian. But Serena's last name was Viveros. Her friends had called her Viv, the same haircut he'd suggested she try 3 months into dating. The same shade of lipstick he'd bought her every birthday. The way he'd once, half asleep, murmured a sentence into her hair that she couldn't quite catch, and she'd thought it was sweet, thought he was dreaming of her. 7 years. She had spent 7 years being a carefully curated echo of a dead woman, and she hadn't even been told she was auditioning. She didn't cry. That surprised her. She thought she would. She'd always been the kind of person who cried at commercials, at wedding speeches, at the ugly parts of love. But standing there, with the coffee going cold and the city moving around her like she was a stone in a river, she felt something much worse than sadness. She felt clarity. Her phone was in her hand before she'd made a conscious decision. She scrolled past Tyler's name, not yet, not him, and found the number she hadn't called in over a year. Aunt Margot, her father's sister, the one who'd moved to the East Coast after the funeral, the one who'd said at every holiday, "There is always a room for you here. Vivian, always." It rang twice. Vivian, Aunt Margot's voice was warm and startled at the same time. "Is everything all right?" "You said there is always a room." A pause, not a hesitation. Aunt Margot never hesitated, but a recalibration. The sound of a woman who understood that some phone calls change everything. There always is. "I am coming, I just need a week to sort things out." "Take whatever time you need, I'll be here." Vivian hung up. She threw the coffee in the trash. She drove home. By the time Tyler walked through the door that evening, the apartment smelled like garlic and rosemary, and Vivian was plating pasta like nothing had happened. He kissed her on the temple, always the temple, never the mouth, she realized now, and said, "Smells amazing, Viv." Viv, she served him dinner. She asked about his day. She laughed at his story about a client who couldn't read a contract. She poured him a second glass of wine and watched him drink it. And she studied his face the way you study. A painting you've just been told is a forgery. He looked the same. That was the cruelest part. He looked exactly like the man she'd loved for 7 years. Because he was, the lie wasn't in his face, it was in hers. The face he'd chosen because it reminded him of someone else. After he fell asleep, Vivian sat on the edge of the bathtub with the door locked and her hands pressed flat against her knees. She did not cry. She made a list in her head: lawyer, lease, bank account, suitcase. She gave herself 7 days, 1 day for every year she'd lost. Then she turned off the light and climbed into bed beside a man who had never once, in 7 years, actually seen her. The bracelet was still warm on her wrist when she found out he'd spent the whole night talking to someone else. It was day 6 of her. Tyler had come home the previous evening with a small velvet box, and that particular smile he wore when he wanted credit for being thoughtful. "Saw this and thought of you," he'd said, fastening a thin gold chain around her wrist. Vivian had looked down at it, delicate, pretty, not her taste at all, and said, "Thank you, because that is what 7 years of training teaches you. You say thank you. You smile. You wear the thing." She'd woken at 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and noticed the blue glow of his phone screen bleeding out from under his pillow. He was asleep, or she didn't touch the phone, she didn't need to. The screen was angled just enough for her to see the call log, a FaceTime session with a contact saved as Ease. Started at 11:47 p.m., ended at 3:12 a.m. the night before. 3 hours and 25 minutes, while she'd been sleeping 6 inches away from him. Vivian went to the bathroom, washed her hands, and came. She lay in the dark with her eyes open and her breathing steady. And she thought, 5 more days. Day 5 brought the dress. Tyler's firm was hosting a client dinner, and he'd asked her to come. "Wear something nice," he'd said, which was his way of saying, "Wear something I pick." She'd agreed because she was still playing the part, still running out the clock. But when she walked into the restaurant on his arm, black dress, hair pinned up the way he liked, she saw her. Serena was alive. Not the Serena from the car accident story. That Serena Vivian had since learned from a single careful internet search had never died at all. She'd moved abroad after college, come back 2 years ago, and was now a junior partner at a consulting firm that did regular business with Tyler's company. She was sitting 3 tables away in a dress that was almost identical to Vivian's same cut, same neckline, same black. Vivian didn't flinch. She sat down, unfolded her napkin, and ordered the salmon. But she watched. She watched Tyler's eyes drift across the room every few minutes. She watched Serena tuck her hair behind her ear in a gesture that Vivian recognized because she'd been taught to do the same thing. She watched the way they didn't look at each other, which was more telling than if they had, because 2 people who truly have nothing to hide don't work that hard at pretending the other person isn't there. Day 4, the hallway. Vivian had gone to Tyler's office to drop off a jacket he'd forgotten. She was walking down the corridor toward his door when she turned a corner and saw them. Tyler and Serena, standing close, not kissing, not touching, but occupying each other's space in a way that was more intimate than either. His hand was on her shoulder. Her forehead was almost against his chest. They were speaking in murmurs, the kind of low private frequency that belongs to people who have a history they think no one else can hear. Vivian stepped back around the corner. She left the jacket with the receptionist and walked out. Day 3. The party. One of Tyler's colleagues was hosting a gathering at his home, and Serena was there because of course she was. Vivian stood by the kitchen island with a glass of sparkling water and watched Serena hold court across the living room, charming, bright, laughing in a way that made people lean in. A woman next to Vivian, someone's wife, nudged her and whispered, "She is gorgeous, isn't she? I heard she and your husband used to date in college." Vivian took a sip of her water. "That is a question for Tyler. As for me, I just casually said yes." The woman blinked, confused. Vivian smiled and walked away. That night, she went home and began quietly. Methodically, she opened the closet and removed every piece of clothing Tyler had chosen for her. The blouses in colors she'd never have picked. The dresses cut for a body shaped slightly different from hers. The shoes that pinched because they were a half size too small. But he'd said they looked perfect. She folded them neatly into bags, Then she took down the photos on the hallway wall, every single one. When Tyler came home, late, always late now, he stopped in the hallway and stared at the empty hooks. "Where are the photos?" "I am redecorating," Vivian said from the kitchen. Not looking up, he stood there for a moment, mouth half open, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been suspicion or might have been fear. Before he could speak, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His face changed, loss of composure, just for a second, the mask slipping sideways, and he grabbed his keys. "Serena's there. I have to go." He didn't even bother finishing the lie. The door closed behind him, and Vivian listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway, and she thought, 3 more days. She picked up another photo frame, the two of them in Paris, her smiling, him looking just past her shoulder, and placed it face down in the box. The fire started at 3:47 in the afternoon, and the only person who told her to run back inside was the woman who wanted her dead. Day 2, Vivian had spent the morning at a lawyer's office, signing papers she should have signed years ago: separation of assets, lease termination, a clean, legal uncoupling that would take effect the moment she was ready to file. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with reading glasses on a chain, had looked at her across the desk and said, "You are very calm for someone ending a 7-year marriage." Vivian had smiled and said, "I've had time to prepare." By afternoon, she needed air. She walked to the old part of downtown, the stretch of blocks with the vintage theater and the used bookstores and the Italian place where she and Tyler had their first date. She hadn't planned to go there. Her feet just knew the route. She was passing the restaurant when she heard his voice. Through the window, half hidden by a potted plant that had seen better days, Tyler was sitting across from Serena at a corner table. He was leaning forward, both hands wrapped around hers, speaking in that low, urgent tone Vivian recognized, the one he used when he was trying to fix something, to smooth something over, to make someone stay. Serena was crying, delicately, the kind of crying that looks beautiful instead of broken. Tyler reached across and wiped her cheek with his thumb. Vivian watched for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned and kept walking. She ended up at the old theater 2 blocks down. It was a relic, crumbling marquee, velvet seats worn thin, the kind of place that survived on nostalgia and community fundraisers. They were setting up for some kind of event, and the side door was propped open. Vivian wandered in because she had nowhere else to be, and because the darkness inside felt honest. She was standing in the back of the auditorium, looking up at the water-stained ceiling when she smelled smoke. It happened fast. One moment the air was dusty and still. The next, something electrical popped behind the stage wall, and a line of flame crawled up the old curtain like a living thing. People started shouting. The handful of workers inside began moving toward the exits. Vivian turned and headed for the side door she'd come through. She was outside, coughing, eyes watering, when Serena appeared. Later, Vivian would try to reconstruct how Serena had gotten there, how she'd known where Vivian was, whether she'd followed her from the restaurant. But in the moment, all she registered was Serena's face, flushed, wide-eyed, convincing. "There is a girl still inside," Serena said, grabbing Vivian's arm. "I saw her. She went toward the back. She is just a kid. She was scared. She ran the wrong way." Vivian didn't think. That was the thing about being someone who'd spent 7 years putting other people first. The instinct was automatic. She turned around and went back in. The smoke was thicker now, black and chemical, the kind that comes from old wiring and older paint. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and pushed through the auditorium, calling out, checking behind seats, behind the stage curtain, in the narrow hallway that led to the dressing rooms. There was no girl. There was no one. The building was empty except for Vivian and the fire. And by the time she realized she'd been lied to, the side door she'd come through was blocked by a fallen beam. She got out through a window. She didn't remember it clearly afterward. Just the heat, the sound of glass, the feeling of pavement under her palms and knees. A stagehand found her on the sidewalk, bleeding from a cut on her forehead and coughing so hard she couldn't speak. And then she looked up and saw them, across the street, on a bench in front of the bookstore. Tyler was pressing a bag of ice to Serena's wrist. Serena was leaning into him, her face buried in his shoulder, trembling or performing trembling, which by now Vivian understood was the same thing. Tyler was murmuring to her, stroking her hair, completely absorbed. He hadn't even looked for Vivian. Something broke open inside her. Not sadness that had burned away in the building. Something older, harder, the last structural support of a thing she'd been holding up for 7 years. She walked across the street. Tyler looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten she existed, which, in a way, he had before he could speak. Vivian slapped Serena across the face. The sound was sharp and clean, like a branch snapping. "She told me there was a child inside," Vivian said, her voice raw from smoke. There was no one inside. Serena's eyes went wide. Loss of composure, real this time, not performed, and she stumbled backward. "I thought I saw. I was confused. The smoke." "Don't." Tyler stepped between them. "Vivian, what the hell are you?" He pushed her. Not hard, not with intent to injure, but enough. Enough to send her stumbling backward, enough for her palms to hit the pavement again. Enough for her to look up at him from the ground and see with perfect clarity which woman he'd chosen to protect. He took Serena by the arm and walked her to his car. He didn't look back. The stagehand, a kid, maybe 20, with soot on his face and panic in his eyes, helped Vivian up and called an ambulance. She sat in the back of it while a paramedic cleaned the cut on her forehead and checked her lungs and asked her if there was someone they should call. She said no, at the hospital. They kept her for 2 hours. Minor smoke inhalation, superficial lacerations, a bruised knee from the fall, nothing that would kill her, everything that would scar. She discharged herself at 9 p.m. She took a cab home. The apartment was empty. Tyler was still with Serena, wherever Serena needed him to be. Vivian walked through the rooms one last time. She picked up her suitcase, already packed, waiting by the bedroom door like a patient friend. On the kitchen counter, she left a note. 2 words, written in the steady hand of a woman who had already left long before her body followed. "We're done." She blocked his number in the elevator. She deleted his contact in the cab. By the time Tyler came home to an empty apartment and a 2-word note, Vivian was 30,000 feet in the air, watching city lights shrink to pinpricks below her, flying east toward a room that had always been waiting. Aunt Margot's house smelled like lavender and old books, and it was the first place in 7 years that didn't feel like a set. It sat at the end of a gravel road in a small coastal town in Maine, the kind of town where people waved at strangers and the grocery store closed at 6, and the ocean was always audible, even when you couldn't see it. The house itself was a Victorian that had been renovated just enough to function and not enough to lose its character. Creaking floors, drafty windows, a kitchen with copper pots hanging from a rack that Margot had installed herself. Vivian arrived at 1 a.m. Margot was waiting on the porch in a bathrobe and rubber boots, holding a mug of tea that she pressed into Vivian's hands before saying a single word. They stood there for a moment, the two of them, listening to the waves in the dark. "You look like hell," Margot said finally. "I feel like hell," Good, that means you are feeling something. Margot led her inside, up the narrow staircase, to a room at the end of the hall. It was small, a single bed with a quilt, a wooden desk by the window, a bookshelf stuffed with paperbacks. The window faced the ocean. Vivian could hear it breathing. "This was your father's room," Margot said from the doorway. "When we were kids. He used to sit at that desk and write terrible poetry about girls he was too shy to talk to." She paused. "He would have wanted you here." Vivian set her suitcase down. She sat on the bed. The quilt smelled like cedar and something faintly floral. And for the first time in 7 days, in 7 years, she cried, not the pretty kind, not the kind Serena did, with delicate tears and a trembling lip. Vivian cried the way buildings collapse, all at once, from the foundation up, ugly and loud and total. She cried until her ribs ached, and her throat was raw, and the pillow was soaked through. Margot sat beside her and said nothing, just rested a hand on her back, steady as a heartbeat. When it was over, Vivian slept for 14 hours. She woke to sunlight and the smell of bacon downstairs. Margot was at the stove, flipping eggs with the efficiency of someone who'd been feeding people her whole life. The kitchen table was set for 2 mismatched plates, cloth napkins, a jar of wildflowers in the center that looked like they'd been picked that morning. "Sit," Margot said. "Eat. Talk when you are ready." Vivian sat, she ate. She wasn't ready, but the food helped. The silence helped more. Margot didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice or platitudes or the kind of well-meaning commentary that makes grief feel like a performance. She just moved around the kitchen, washing dishes, humming something Vivian half recognized, letting the morning be what it was. It was 3 days before Vivian told her everything. They were sitting on the back porch, watching the tide come in, wrapped in blankets, because the Maine coast in early spring was beautiful and merciless. Vivian started with the barista and the name and the coffee going cold on the sidewalk. And she didn't stop until she'd reached the fire and the note and the airplane and the 30,000 feet of distance that still didn't feel like enough. Margot listened without interrupting. When Vivian finished, the older woman was quiet for a long time, watching the waves fold over themselves. "Your father," she said finally, "was the kindest man I ever knew. Too kind, sometimes. He had this habit of seeing the best in people, even when they were showing him the worst. He'd make excuses for it. He'd bend himself into shapes that didn't fit just to make someone else comfortable." She turned to look at Vivian. "You inherited that. It is a beautiful quality. It is also a dangerous one." "I don't feel kind," Vivian said. "I feel stupid. Those aren't the same thing, and you know it." Margot pulled her blanket tighter. "You weren't stupid, Vivian. You were loyal to someone who didn't deserve it. There is a difference. Stupid is not learning. You learned, you left. That is not stupidity. That is courage with a delayed fuse." Vivian almost smiled. "Almost? What do I do now? Whatever you want. That is the whole point. I don't know what I want. I haven't known what I want in 7 years. Every preference I have, my haircut, my clothes, the way I take my coffee, I don't know if any of it is mine. He shaped everything. He chose everything. I don't even know if I like salmon or if I just ordered it because he told me I did." Margot stood up, disappeared inside, and came back with 2 things, a blank notebook and a pen. "Start here," she said, placing them in Vivian's lap. "Write down everything you know about yourself that has nothing to do with him. It doesn't matter how small, your favorite, a song you loved before you met him, the name of your childhood dog, anything that is yours." Vivian opened the notebook. She stared at the blank page for a long time. Then she wrote, "I like the sound of the ocean at night." It was the first true thing she'd said in 7 years, and it was hers. The days took on a rhythm. Mornings, coffee on the porch, watching the fishing boats go out. Mid-morning, a walk along the coastal path, sometimes alone, sometimes with Margot, who had the stamina of a woman half her age and the conversational style of someone who understood that silence was a language too. Afternoons, the notebook, evenings, cooking together, eating together, sitting by the fire while Margot read and Vivian stared at the flames and tried to remember who she'd been before Tyler had started editing her. The notebook filled slowly. Some entries were simple. I like thunderstorms. I hate the color beige. I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was 12. Me favorite book is still the one Dad read to me, The Secret Garden. Others were harder. I don't know if I want children. He always said we would. I never said I did. I used to paint watercolors. I stopped because he said the apartment smelled like turpentine. I think I am funny. I think I stopped being funny because he never laughed. And one, written late at night with the ocean roaring outside. I think I loved him. I think he loved an idea. I don't think those are the same thing. On the 7th day, 1 week since she'd arrived, 2 weeks since the barista had said a name that unraveled everything. Vivian woke up early, before Margot, before the sun. She went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open to a fresh page. She wrote, "Things I want to do," and underneath, in handwriting that was steadier than it had been in weeks. Won't learn who I am without him. 2, pain again. 3, stop answering to someone else's name. She paused, then added, 4, find out what Serena Viveros actually looks like, because I need to know how much of my face was chosen and how much was coincidence. She closed the notebook. She drank her coffee. Outside, the first light was touching the water, turning it from black to silver to blue. And Vivian watched it happen, the way you watch a door opening slowly, inevitably, into something you can't yet see but know is there. Her phone buzzed. She'd gotten a new number, given it to no one except Margot and the lawyer. But the screen showed an unknown caller. And when she answered, the voice on the other end was one she hadn't heard in 3 years. Vivian, it is Claire. Claire Nakamura, from college. Vivian's hand tightened on the phone. Claire, her roommate freshman year, her best friend for 4 years. The friendship Tyler had slowly, methodically dismantled. A missed call here, a scheduling conflict there, a quiet campaign of isolation disguised as couplehood. "How did you get this number?" Vivian asked. "Your aunt? I called your old number and it was disconnected. So I tracked down Margot through your dad's obituary page. I know that sounds insane. I am sorry, but I saw something and I need to talk to you." "What did you see?" A pause, the sound of Claire taking a breath. "I saw Serena Viveros at a fundraiser last weekend. She was with Tyler. They were together, publicly. And Vivian, she was wearing your bracelet, the gold one, and she was introducing herself to people as..." Claire stopped. "As what?" Vivian said. "As Vivian Chen." The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee was getting cold. Outside, the ocean kept moving, indifferent to the small, sharp violence of what had just been said. Vivian closed her eyes. "Tell me everything," she said. Claire talked for 47 minutes. Vivian didn't interrupt once. The fundraiser had been for a children's literacy nonprofit, the kind of event where people in expensive clothes wrote checks to feel better about themselves and then drank champagne until they forgot the amount. Claire had gone because her firm was a sponsor. She'd been standing near the silent auction table, bidding on a weekend in the Berkshires she couldn't afford when she heard it. "Hi, I am Vivian Chen. My husband Tyler and I are so thrilled to support this cause." Claire had turned around and seen a woman she didn't recognize wearing a face. She almost did. Serena Viveros, though Claire didn't know her name yet, was standing at the center of a small circle of donors, her hand resting on Tyler's arm with the casual possessiveness of someone who'd been practicing the gesture. She was wearing the gold bracelet. She was wearing a black dress with the same cut Vivian always wore. Her hair was pinned up the same way, and she was smiling Vivian's smile, not a copy. Exactly, but a translation, the way a cover song captures the melody while missing the soul. "I thought I was losing my mind," Claire said. "I thought maybe you'd changed, surgery or weight loss or something. But then I got closer and I realized it wasn't you. It was someone who was trying to be you." And Tyler was standing right there, introducing her to people. And nobody questioned it because nobody in that room had ever met the real Vivian Chen. "How many people were there?" Vivian asked. 200, maybe more. Major donors, board members, press. There was a photographer from the society page. So there are photos. I took screenshots before they could scrub them. I am sending them now. Vivian's phone buzzed. She opened the images one by one, and each one was a small, precise wound. The first, Serena and Tyler at the entrance, her hand in his, both of them smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Tyler and Vivian Chen, longtime supporters of the Children's Literacy Alliance." The second, Serena alone, holding a glass of wine, laughing at something off camera. She was wearing pearl earrings that Vivian recognized. They'd been a gift from Tyler's mother, given to Vivian, taken back, apparently without anyone noticing. The third, a group shot. Serena standing between two women Vivian had never met, all three of them leaning in like old friends. Serena's posture was perfect. Shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, the exact stance Tyler had spent years coaching Vivian into stand up straight. You look better when you stand up straight. The fourth photo was the one that stopped her breathing. It was Serena and Tyler at a table, seated side by side. Serena was looking at the camera, but Tyler was looking at her, at Serena, with an expression Vivian had never seen on his face in 7 years of marriage. It wasn't love. Exactly. It was satisfaction, the look of a man admiring something he'd built. "Vivian?" Claire's voice, distant. "Are you still there?" "I am here. There is more." After the event, I did some digging. Tyler's been taking her everywhere. Dinners, client meetings, his firm's annual retreat. He has introduced her as his wife to at least 3 different social circles. And she is Vivian. She is living in your apartment. Or apartment. Your apartment. The lease is in your name. I checked. Vivian set the phone down on the table. She looked at the photos again. She looked at the woman wearing her name, her clothes, her earrings, her life. She looked at the bracelet on Serena's wrist, the one Tyler had fastened on Vivian's arm 6 days before she left, the one she'd taken off and left on the bathroom counter because it had never been for her. It had been a rehearsal. He hadn't been giving Vivian a gift. He'd been sizing the costume. "Claire," Vivian said, "I need you to do something for me, anything. I need you to find out everywhere they've been, every event, every dinner, every introduction. I need names, dates, and photos. Can you do that?" "I've already started. I have a friend at the society desk at the Herald. She owes me a favor." "Good." And Claire, "Yeah, thank you for calling. Thank you for not forgetting me." A pause. When Claire spoke again, her voice was thick. "I never forgot you, Viv. He just made it really hard to reach you." Vivian hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time. The coffee was cold. The sun was fully up now, painting the room in shades of gold that felt unearned. She could hear Margot moving around upstairs, the creak of floorboards, the sound of a drawer opening and closing, the small domestic noises of a life lived without performance. When Margot came downstairs, she took one look at Vivian's face and put the kettle on without asking. "Tell me," she said. Vivian told her. Margot listened, her hands wrapped around her own mug, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something cold and focused that Vivian had never seen on her aunt's face before. "He replaced you," Margot said when Vivian finished. It wasn't a question. "He didn't replace me," he continued. He took everything he spent 7 years building, the way I dressed, the way I stood, the way I smiled at strangers, and he put it on someone else. I wasn't his wife. I was a prototype." Margot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "That is a lie. You know exactly what you are going to do. You've known since you heard her say your name." Vivian looked at her aunt. Margot looked back, steady, unflinching, with the same eyes Vivian's father had, dark brown, warm, capable of seeing through every wall you tried to build. "I am going to take my name back," Vivian said. "How?" "I am going to walk into a room where she is pretending to be me, and I am going to introduce myself." Margot nodded slowly. And then I am going to watch them both try to explain." The plan took shape over the next week, and it was Claire who provided the opportunity. The Children's Literacy Alliance was hosting its annual gala in 3 weeks, a black tie event at the Whitfield Hotel in Boston. 500 guests, press coverage, the full machinery of high society philanthropy. Tyler and Vivian were on the guest list. They'd purchased a table for 10. They were listed as co-chairs of the silent auction committee. "He is in deep," Claire said over the phone. "This isn't a casual thing. He has built an entire social identity around her being you. She has business cards, she has a LinkedIn profile under your name. A LinkedIn profile with your photo, your old headshot from the university website. She must have found it archived somewhere." Vivian felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain, not anger, but something architectural. The feeling of a structure being tested, load-bearing walls under pressure. The moment before you find out whether the building holds or falls. "I need an invitation to the gala." "Already done. My firm has a table. You are my +1. I listed you under a different name, Vivian Margot Hartley. Your mother's maiden name, right?" "Right." "Nobody will connect it. You'll be just another guest." "Until I am not," Claire paused. "Viv, are you sure about this? You could just..." "The lawyer could handle it. The identity theft alone is a federal offense. You could let the system. The system doesn't know what it feels like to see someone else wearing your face. I need to be in that room. I need him to see me. I need her to see me." "And then what?" Vivian thought about the notebook upstairs, the list of things she wanted. The first entry, "Learn who I am without him." She thought about the woman in the photos, wearing her name like a borrowed coat, and she thought about the 7 years she'd spent being shaped and edited and refined into someone else's vision of a wife. And she thought about the fire and the lie and the empty hallway where her photos used to hang. "And then," Vivian said, "I am going to show every person in that room the difference between the woman he built and the woman I actually am." She started painting again. It happened on a Tuesday without ceremony. Margot had a set of watercolors in the attic. Old ones, the pigments slightly dried, the brushes stiff from years of disuse. Vivian carried them down to the back porch, set up a glass of water, and stared at the blank paper for 20 minutes. Then she painted the ocean. Not well, not beautifully. The colors bled where they shouldn't have, and the horizon line was crooked, and the waves looked more like bruises than water. But it was hers. Every clumsy stroke, every imperfect choice, every shade of blue that didn't match the real thing but matched the way she felt about the real thing, it was hers. She painted every day after that. The ocean, the house, Margot's hands around a coffee mug, the view from her father's window at dawn. She painted badly, and then less badly. And then, on some days, with a raw, unpolished honesty that surprised her. She wasn't good. She didn't need to be good. She needed to be hers. On the 14th day, she painted a self-portrait. She sat in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at herself, really looked, for the first time in years. The cut on her forehead had healed into a thin, pink line. Her hair, freed from the style Tyler preferred, had started to curl at the ends the way it naturally did. She was thinner than she should have been, and there were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there a month ago, but her face was her face, and no one else was wearing it. She painted what she saw, not what Tyler would have wanted her to see. Not the version that stood up straight and smiled on command and ordered the salmon. The real one, the one with the scar and the messy hair and the eyes that had seen a fire and walked through it. When she was done, she pinned the portrait to the wall above the desk in her father's room. It wasn't beautiful. It was true. And for the first time in 7 years, Vivian Chen looked at an image of herself and recognized the woman looking back. 3 days before the gala, a package arrived. It was addressed to Vivian Margot Hartley, care of Margot's address. Inside was a dress, not black, not the cut Tyler would have chosen, not anything that belonged to the woman Serena was pretending to be. It was deep red, floor length, with a neckline that Vivian had picked herself from a website she'd found at 2 a.m. while everyone else was sleeping. It fit perfectly. It fit like it had been waiting for her. She tried it on in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was not the woman who had left New York 3 weeks ago. She was not the woman who had ordered salmon at a client dinner. She was not the woman who had been pushed to the ground by the man who was supposed to protect her. She was someone new, or someone old, or someone who had always been there underneath the edits, waiting for the draft to be thrown away. Vivian looked at herself in the red dress, and she smiled, not the smile Tyler had taught her. Not the one that was designed to make other people comfortable, but the one that came from somewhere deep and feral and entirely her own. "There you are," she whispered. The night before the gala, Margot knocked on her door. "Come in," Margot entered, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey, the good kind, the bottle she kept on the top shelf for occasions that mattered. She handed one to Vivian and sat on the edge of the bed. "I want to tell you something," Margot said, "and I want you to hear it, really hear it, before you walk into that room tomorrow." "Okay. Your father spent his whole life being gentle. It was his gift and his curse. He was gentle with your mother, even when she didn't deserve it. He was gentle with me, even when I was impossible. He was gentle with the world, and the world took advantage of that gentleness over and over, because the world mistakes kindness for weakness and softness for surrender." Margot took a sip of whiskey. "You have his gentleness, Vivian, but you also have something he never did. You have your mother's fire. I watched you walk into this house 3 weeks ago, broken and burned and bleeding. And I watched you put yourself back together piece by piece. And I want you to know what you are about to do tomorrow isn't revenge. It is not anger. It is not even justice." "What is it?" Margot looked at her with those dark brown eyes, steady as the tide. "It is reclamation." They clinked glasses they drank outside. The ocean kept its rhythm, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere in Boston, in an apartment that still had Vivian's name on the lease, a woman was trying on a black dress and practicing a smile that didn't belong to her. Tomorrow, Vivian would walk into the Whitfield Hotel in a red dress and her own name, and she would set the record straight. But tonight she sat with her aunt and drank whiskey and listened to the waves, and she was, for the first time in 7 years, exactly where she was supposed to be. The Whitfield Hotel was the kind of place that had been designed to make marble floors, crystal chandeliers, ceilings high enough to echo, and a grand ballroom that could hold 500 people and still make each one feel like they were the center of the room. It was old money architecture, built to impress, maintained to intimidate, and tonight dressed in white flowers and soft gold lighting for the Children's Literacy Alliance's annual gala. Vivian arrived at 7:15, 15 minutes after doors opened. Early enough to settle in, late enough to avoid the receiving line. Claire was waiting in the lobby, wearing a navy gown and an expression that was trying very hard to be calm. She spotted Vivian coming through the revolving door, and her composure cracked, not into worry, but into something like awe. "Jesus, Viv, too much. You look like you are about to burn something down." That is the idea. They stood for a moment, taking each other in. 3 years of silence dissolved in a single phone call and rebuilt in 3 weeks of late-night conversations and shared purpose. Claire looked the same, sharp jaw, dark eyes, the kind of face that looked serious even when she was laughing. She'd cut her hair shorter. She was wearing lipstick, which was new. She looked like someone who had spent the last 3 years becoming exactly who she wanted to be, which made Vivian both proud and envious. "You ready?" Claire asked. "Number good. Ready is overrated. Let's go." They walked into the ballroom together. The room was already half full. Waiters circulated with champagne and small architectural appetizers that looked better than they tasted. A string quartet played something classical and inoffensive in the corner. Round tables draped in white linen filled the floor, each one set with crystal glasses and place cards written in calligraphy. At the far end, a stage had been set up for the evening's program: speeches, an auction, the usual choreography of organized generosity. Claire's table was near the middle of the room, good sightlines, close enough to the main aisle to see arrivals, far enough from the stage to talk without being overheard. Claire had thought of everything. "Their table is there," Claire said quietly, nodding toward the front of the room. "Table 310 seats. He bought the whole thing, $15,000. With whose money?" "Yours, probably. The joint account hasn't been closed yet." Vivian filed that away, another item for the lawyer. They sat down. Claire introduced her to the others at their table, colleagues from her firm, a married couple who ran a bookstore in Cambridge, a retired professor who immediately started telling Vivian about his grandchildren. Vivian smiled, shook hands, made small talk. She was good at this. Tyler had made sure of that. The difference was that tonight, for the first time, she was performing for herself. At 7:42, they arrived. Vivian saw Tyler first. He came through the main entrance in a charcoal suit she didn't recognize, new, expensive, tailored in a way that suggested someone else was choosing his clothes now too. He was smiling the smile she knew, the one that was calibrated for public consumption, warm enough to invite, controlled enough to impress. He shook hands with someone at the door. He laughed at something. He was, as always, performing the role of a man who had everything together. And then Serena stepped in behind him. Vivian's breath caught, not from pain, from recognition. Serena was wearing black, a fitted gown, high neckline, long sleeves, the exact silhouette Tyler had always chosen for Vivian. Her hair was up, pinned in the style Vivian had worn for years, the one that took 45 minutes and 17 bobby pins, and that Tyler called elegant. The gold bracelet was on her left wrist, the pearl earrings were in her ears, and she was standing the way Vivian used to stand, shoulders back, chin lifted. One hand resting lightly on Tyler's arm with the practiced ease of someone who had studied the role and committed it to memory. From across the room, if you didn't know better, she could have been Vivian Chen. But Vivian knew better, and from where she sat she could see the seams. The smile was slightly too wide. The posture was slightly too rigid. The way Serena held her champagne glass with her whole hand, not just her fingers, was wrong. Small things. Things only someone who had lived inside that performance for 7 years would notice. Serena was a good copy, but she was... Claire murmured, "I am fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you are doing math." "I am doing math. I am calculating how long it takes before she sees me. And then we find out if she is as good an actress as she thinks she is." The first hour passed in a careful choreography of avoidance. Vivian stayed at her table, talked to the professor, bid on a silent auction item she didn't want, a weekend at a vineyard in Napa, and watched. She watched Tyler work the room the way he always did, moving from group to group with the fluid confidence of a man who believed every room was his. She watched Serena beside him, mirroring his movements, laughing when he laughed, touching his arm at the right moments, playing the role with the dedication of an understudy who'd finally gotten the lead. She watched people accept it. That was the part that hurt, not the deception itself, but how easily it worked. No one questioned, no one looked twice. Serena said, "I am Vivian Chen," and people smiled and shook her hand and moved on, because why would anyone lie about something so fundamental? Tyler and Serena were exploiting that assumption with surgical precision. At 8:30, the program began. The executive director of the Alliance gave a speech about literacy rates and childhood development, and the transformative power of reading. A video played, children in classrooms, volunteers in libraries, the usual montage of impact designed to open wallets. Then the auction started, and the energy in the room shifted from philanthropic to competitive, which was, Vivian suspected. The point, Tyler bid on a painting. Serena bid on a vacation package. They did it publicly, raising their paddles with the casual authority of people who wanted to be seen spending money. The auctioneer called them by name. "Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Chen." And Vivian felt something tighten in her jaw. Mrs. Chen. She had never taken his name. They'd discussed it before the wedding, and Vivian had decided to keep her own. Chen was her father's name, and she wasn't ready to let it go. Tyler had agreed, or seemed to. But now, in this room, with this woman, he'd finally gotten what he wanted. A wife who would take his name, wear his choices, and never push back. Except she was wearing a stolen identity and a borrowed bracelet, and the real Vivian Chen was sitting 40 feet away in a red dress, waiting. At 9:15, the auction ended. The lights came up slightly. The string quartet resumed. People stood, stretched, began circulating again. This was the moment, the loose social hour between the program and dessert, when people moved freely and conversations happened by accident. Vivian stood up. "Now," Claire asked. "Now, I am coming with you. Number, I need to do this alone." Claire looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope. "What is this?" Vivian asked. "Insurance, open it if things go sideways." Vivian tucked the envelope into her purse. She squeezed Claire's hand once hard, quick, the way you grip something before jumping, and then she walked across the ballroom floor toward table 3. She didn't rush. She moved through the crowd, the way water moves through rock, steady, patient, inevitable. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, not because she wanted it, but because it gave her hands something to do. She smiled at strangers. She nodded at people she didn't know. She let the room absorb her, let herself become part of its rhythm, so that by the time she reached the front of the ballroom, she was just another guest moving through the current. Table 3 was half empty. Most of its occupants had scattered into the crowd, networking, drinking, performing the rituals of social currency. Two women remained, deep in conversation about a school board election. Tyler's chair was pushed back, his napkin folded on the table. Serena's seat was empty too, her clutch left behind to mark her place, a small black bag with a gold clasp that Vivian recognized because she'd owned the same one, because it was the same one. Vivian scanned the room, found Tyler first. He was near the bar talking to a man in a gray suit, gesturing with the easy authority of someone making a point he expected to win. Then she found Serena. She was standing alone near the silent auction table, studying the bid sheets with a glass of white wine in her hand. Her back was to the room. From this angle, Vivian could see the clasp of the gold bracelet, the line of her neck, the precise architecture of the updo that had taken 45 minutes and 17 bobby pins. Vivian walked toward her, 10 feet, 5 threes. She stopped beside Serena and looked down at the bid sheet. It was for a weekend in Martha's Vineyard. The current high bid was $4,000, written in handwriting that Vivian didn't recognize under a name she did, Vivian Chen. "Beautiful lot," Vivian said. Serena looked up, smiled. The automatic, social smile of someone being polite to a stranger. "It really is. We went to the vineyard last summer, and it was just," she stopped. The smile didn't fade, it froze. Like a frame caught mid-projection, the image still there but the motion gone. Serena's eyes moved over Vivian's face quickly at first, then slowly, then with the dawning, catastrophic recognition of someone who has just seen a ghost walk into the room and pick up a glass of champagne. She knew, of course she knew. She'd studied Vivian's face, she'd memorized it. She'd spent months learning to replicate its expressions, its angles, its particular way of catching light. She knew Vivian's face better than most people knew their own, because she'd made it her job to become it. And now the original was standing 3 feet away, in a red dress, with a scar on her forehead, and a look in her eyes that was nothing like anything Serena had practiced in the mirror. "Hi," Vivian said. "I am Vivian Chen." Serena's wine glass trembled, just slightly, just enough. I am sorry. Vivian Chen, that is my name. I think you've been using it." The color left Serena's face in stages, first the cheeks, then the lips, then the skin around her eyes, until she looked like a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know what you are talking about." "You do. You know exactly what I am talking about. You are wearing my bracelet. You are wearing my earrings. You are standing in a room full of people who think you are me, and you've been doing it for months." Vivian kept her voice low, steady, conversational. To anyone watching, they were two women having a pleasant chat by the auction table. "I am not here to make a scene. I am here to give you a choice." Serena's hand tightened on her wine glass. Her eyes darted to the left, toward the bar, toward Tyler, and Vivian saw the calculation happen in real time. The instinct to run, the instinct to call for help, the instinct to defer to the man who had built this situation and let him handle the fallout. "Don't," Vivian said quietly. "Don't look at him. Look at me. This is between us right now. He'll get his turn." Serena looked at her, and for the first time, Vivian saw something beneath the performance. Not guilt, not fear, but something more complicated, something that looked almost like relief. "What choice?" Serena whispered. "You can walk out of this room right now. Take off the bracelet, leave the earrings on the table, and walk out. I won't follow you, I won't press charges tonight. You'll have time to figure out your next move. That is option 1. And option 2. Option 2 is that I walk over to the executive director of this organization, introduce myself with my driver's license and my social security card, and the 7 years of tax returns that prove I am Vivian Chen, and I let this room figure out the rest." Serena stared at her. The wine glass was shaking visibly now. "He told me you were gone," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "He told me you left. He said you abandoned everything. The apartment, the accounts, the life. He said you didn't want any of it anymore. He said a lot of things. He is very good at that. He said you agreed. He said it was an arrangement, that you wanted a clean break, and you didn't care what happened after. Did you believe that?" Serena didn't answer, which was an answer. "You knew," Vivian said, not accusatory, almost gentle. "You knew it wasn't right. You knew real people don't just hand over their identity like a set of keys. But he made it sound reasonable, didn't he? He made it sound like the logical thing. He is very good at making unreasonable things sound logical. I know. I lived with it for 7 years." Serena's eyes were wet. She blinked rapidly, fighting it, and Vivian recognized that too, the desperate effort to maintain composure in public, the terror of being seen falling apart, the years of training that said, "Don't make a scene, don't draw attention, don't be difficult." "How long?" Vivian asked. "How long what? How long has he been shaping you?" Serena's mouth opened. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the foundation, a load-bearing wall giving way. 14 months, she said. "And when did you stop being Serena?" The crack widened. Serena's hand went to the bracelet on her wrist, not to protect it, but to touch it. "The way you touch a wound to confirm it is real." "I don't remember," she whispered. "I don't remember when it happened. It was so gradual. First, it was just, he said I should try a different hairstyle. Then it was the clothes. Then it was the way I talked, the way I stood, the words I used. He'd correct me gently. Always gently. Vivian wouldn't say it that way. Vivian would hold her glass like this. Vivian would smile more. Vivian would smile less. Always gently. That is the part that should terrify you. Not the correction, the delivery. Tyler didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He built a manual for how to be his wife and handed it to 2 different women like an employee handbook. Serena thought she was being mentored. Vivian thought she was being loved. Same curriculum, different enrollment dates. The gentleness was the mechanism, not the mercy. And I kept thinking he was helping me. I kept thinking he was making me better. She looked at Vivian with an expression that was equal parts horror and recognition. He did the same thing to you, didn't he? Yes. And you didn't see it either. Not until I'd already disappeared. They stood there, the 2 of them, in the middle of a ballroom, full of people who didn't know what was happening. 2 women shaped by the same hands, standing on opposite sides of the same lie. And for a moment, just a moment, the anger Vivian had carried for 3 weeks softened into something more complicated. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but recognition. The terrible, intimate recognition of seeing your own damage reflected in someone else's face. "He is coming," Serena said suddenly, her eyes fixed on something over Vivian's shoulder. Vivian didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel it, the shift in the air, the particular displacement that Tyler created when he entered a space, the gravitational pull of a man who believed every room rearranged itself around him. "Serena," his voice, behind her, close. "Who is your friend?" Vivian turned around. Later, she would try to describe the look on Tyler's face and fail. It wasn't shock. Shock is sudden, involuntary, a reflex of the nervous system. This was something slower, something architectural. She watched the recognition build in his eyes the way you watch a crack spread across a wall, first a hairline fracture, then a split, Then the slow, irreversible understanding that the structure was compromised. He looked at her face. He looked at the scar on her forehead. He looked at the red dress, the wrong color, the wrong cut, the wrong everything. And she watched him try to process the fact that the woman standing in front of him was not the one he'd built. She was the one he'd broken. And she was still standing. "Vivian," he said, not a greeting, a diagnosis. The way a doctor says the name of a disease. "Hello, Tyler." The ballroom continued around them. The string quartet played, waiters circulated. 500 people drank champagne and bid on vacations and had no idea that at the silent auction table, a man was standing between two versions of the same lie. And both of them were looking at him with eyes that saw exactly what he was. "You look," he stopped, recalibrated. She could see him doing it, the rapid internal adjustment, the search for the right tone, the right angle, the right version of himself to deploy. He'd done this 1,000 times. He was a master of it. But tonight, for the first time, Vivian could see the machinery. "You look well, I am glad. I was worried about you." "Were you?" "Of course. You left so suddenly, I didn't know where you'd gone. You tried to call me from a number I'd blocked. And when that didn't work, you moved another woman into my apartment and gave her my name. That is not worry, Tyler. That is replacement." His jaw tightened, barely perceptible. The micro-expression of a man who was not accustomed to being interrupted. "This isn't the place for this conversation," he said. Low, controlled. The voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while making you feel unreasonable. "You are right. This isn't the place. The place would have been our apartment 3 weeks ago, when you pushed me into a wall and I set fire to 7 years of lies. But you weren't interested in having the conversation then, so we're having it now." "Vivian, don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut. Serena flinched. Tyler didn't. "Don't say my name like that. Don't say it like it is something you own. You don't own it. You never did. You just convinced me that you did. And when I stopped believing it, you found someone else to convince." She looked at Serena. Serena looked at the floor. "I am not here to fight with you," Vivian said, turning back to Tyler. "I am not here to scream or cry or give you the satisfaction of watching me fall apart in public. I am here to tell you, and everyone in this room, that my name is Vivian Chen, that I am the only Vivian Chen, and that the woman standing next to you is Serena Viveros. And she has been committing identity fraud at your direction for the past 14 months. Tyler's expression didn't change. That was the terror. His face remained perfectly composed. The slight smile, the relaxed shoulders, the steady eye contact. He looked like a man having a mildly inconvenient conversation. At a party, he looked like a man who had prepared for this. "You are upset," he said. "I understand the separation has been difficult for both of us, but making accusations in a public setting, this isn't like you, Vivian. This isn't who you are. You are right. It isn't who I was. Because who I was is someone you invented, and I am done being her." She reached into her purse. Her fingers found the envelope Claire had given her. She hadn't planned to open it. Not yet, not here. But something in Tyler's composure, in the absolute unshakable certainty that he could control this situation, the way he controlled everything else, made her change her mind. She opened the envelope. Inside were 3 photographs and a single sheet of paper. The first photographed Tyler and Serena at a restaurant, a reservation made under the name Vivian Chen, dated 2 weeks after Vivian had left New York. The timestamp was visible. The reservation confirmation was stapled to the back. The second photograph, a screenshot of the LinkedIn profile. Vivian Chen, Community Engagement Director, Serena's face. Vivian's credentials, a work history that was half real and half fabricated, stitched together with the precision of someone who understood that the best lies are mostly true. The third photograph, Serena signing a document at what appeared to be a bank. The document was partially visible. The name on the signature line was Vivian Chen. The date was 10 days ago. The sheet of paper was a printout from the Maine Secretary of State's office. A notarized affidavit confirming Vivian Chen's identity, her social security number, her current address, and her statement that she had not authorized any person to use her name, likeness, or credentials for any purpose. Vivian held the photographs up, not high, not dramatically, not like a courtroom reveal. She held them at chest height, angled toward Tyler, close enough for him to see, and no one else. "This is what Claire found," she said quietly. "This is what my lawyer has. This is what the district attorney's office will have by Monday morning if you don't do exactly what I am about to ask you to do." For the first time, something moved behind Tyler's eyes. Not fear, not yet, but the precursor to fear. The recognition that the board had shifted, that the pieces were not where he'd left them, that the game he thought he was playing had changed while he wasn't looking. "What do you want?" he said. And there it was, the question she'd been waiting for. The question that for 7 years had only ever flowed in one direction, from her to him, always her asking, always him deciding. "What do you want for dinner? What do you want me to wear? What do you want me to say?" A lifetime of deference compressed into 3 words. And now, finally, impossibly, he was the one. She looked at the room full of people who didn't know her name, and she felt something settle inside her. Not peace, not yet, but the precursor to peace. The recognition that the ground beneath her feet was solid, that the voice in her throat was her own, that the woman in the red dress was not a performance but a person. And she was done asking permission to exist. "I want my name back," she said. "I want the apartment lease transferred out of my name by the end of the week. I want the joint accounts frozen and audited. I want every document she signed as me invalidated. I want a public correction issued to every organization, every social circle, every person who was introduced to her as Vivian Chen. And I want you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Just once. Just one true thing about why you did this." Tyler was quiet for a long time. The string quartet had stopped. The room was getting louder, laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. But around the 3 of them, there was a pocket of silence, so dense it felt. Then he said something Vivian didn't expect. "Because you were perfect." He said perfect, like it was a love letter. It was an autopsy report. Tyler wasn't confessing affection, he was mourning a product. 7 years of adjustments, corrections, and micro-edits. And when the finished piece walked out the door, his first instinct wasn't grief. It was waste management. He couldn't let the work go unfinished. So he cast a new lead. Same script, same stage directions, different actress. That is not love. That is manufacturing. She blinked. "You were perfect," he repeated. "The way you moved, the way you spoke, the way you made people feel when you walked into a room. I spent years getting it right. Every detail, every adjustment, every small correction. And when you left, I couldn't." He stopped, swallowed. For the first time, the composure cracked, and what was underneath was not remorse or love or even anger. It was bewilderment. The genuine, disoriented confusion of a man who could not understand why his creation had walked away. "I couldn't let it go to waste." Vivian stared at him. "I wasn't a project, Tyler. I know. Number you don't. You still don't. You are standing here telling me I was perfect. Like that is a compliment. Like I should be flattered that you spent 7 years sanding down every edge I had until I fit the shape you wanted. That is not love. That is not even obsession. That is carpentry. Vivian, and when the wood didn't cooperate, you found new wood. She looked at Serena. The other woman was crying now, silently, the tears running down her face in clean lines, ruining the makeup that had been applied to look like Vivian's. She looked small. She looked young. She looked like someone who had walked into a trap so slowly that she'd mistaken the closing walls for an embrace. Serena, Vivian said gently. Serena looked up. You can still leave. The offer stands. Walk out of this room and start figuring out who you are without him. It is the hardest thing you'll ever do, and it is the only thing that matters. Serena looked at Vivian. She looked at Tyler. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist, the gold one, the one that had never been a gift but a costume piece, a prop in a play she hadn't known she was performing. She unclasped it. One click, that is all it took. Not a speech, not a confrontation. Just a woman removing a bracelet that was never hers and handing it back to the woman. It was never really for either. Two women shaped by the same hands, standing 3 feet apart, and the most powerful thing that happened between them wasn't anger. It was recognition. Serena didn't unclasp a bracelet. She unclasped the roll, and she walked out before the curtain call. The sound was small, a tiny click, barely audible over the noise of the room. But Vivian heard it the way you hear a door unlocking. Serena held the bracelet out, and Vivian took it. And for a moment their fingers touched, and something passed between them that was not friendship or forgiveness, but something older and more fundamental, the shared understanding of two women who had been shaped by the same hands and were choosing. Finally, to break the mold, Serena, through the ballroom, past the tables, past the waiters and the champagne and the string quartet that had started playing again. She walked out of the Whitfield Hotel and into the night, and she didn't look back. Vivian watched her go. Then she turned to Tyler. He was standing very still. The composure was gone. What was left was something raw and unfinished. Not the man he performed, but the man he was, smaller than she remembered. Older, ordinary in a way that was almost disappointing, because the monster you build in your head is always more impressive than the person standing in front of you. My lawyer will be in touch, Vivian said. Don't contact me. Don't contact my aunt. Don't contact Claire. And Tyler. He looked at her. Find a therapist, a real one. Not someone who'll tell you what you want to hear, someone who'll tell you the truth. You might not recognize it at first. It has been a while. She set the bracelet on the table. She didn't want it. She'd never wanted it. It had always been his, even when it was on her wrist. Then Vivian Chen, the real one, the only one. The one in the red dress with the scar on her forehead and the paint under her fingernails and the ocean still in her ears, turned and walked back across the ballroom to where Claire was waiting with 2 glasses of champagne and an expression that was trying very hard not to be a smile. Well, Claire said, it is done. How do you feel? Vivian took the champagne. She looked back across the room. Tyler was still standing by the auction table, alone, holding nothing, looking at the space where 2 women had been and finding it empty. I feel like myself, Vivian said, and she meant it. The drive back to Maine took 4 hours and 12 minutes. Claire drove. Vivian sat in the passenger seat with her shoes off and her feet on the dashboard and the window cracked 2 inches, letting the November air cut through the car in a thin, cold line that smelled like highway and pine and the particular emptiness of New England at midnight. They didn't talk for the first hour, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. And the silence was doing a better job of holding it than words could. The highway unspooled in front of them, dark, straight, punctuated by the rhythmic flash of lane markers and the occasional sweep of oncoming headlights. Claire drove the way she did everything, precisely, confidently, with both hands on the wheel and her eyes fixed forward. At 11:47, somewhere between Portsmouth and Kennebunk, Vivian started laughing. It came from nowhere. One moment she was staring at the road, replaying the look on Tyler's face, that bewildered, disassembled expression, the face of a man watching his own architecture collapse. And the next moment, she was laughing so hard her ribs ached. Not the polite, measured laugh she'd spent 7 years perfecting. This was ugly, graceless, full-bodied, the kind of laugh that comes from the basement of your chest and doesn't care what it sounds like on the way out. Claire glanced at her. "You okay?" He said I was perfect. Vivian wiped her eyes. 7 years of controlling every detail of my life, and his explanation was that I was perfect. Like I was a souffle, like I was a thesis project that he couldn't bear to see go unfinished. To be fair, you were a very good souffle. I was a spectacular souffle. I was the best souffle he'll ever make, and I collapsed on purpose. They both laughed then, the kind of laughter that lives next door to crying, that shares a wall with grief and borrows its intensity. They laughed until Claire had to pull over at a rest stop because she couldn't see the road, and they sat in the parked car under fluorescent lights with the engine running and laughed until they were empty. And then they were quiet again, and the quiet was different now. Lighter, cleaned out. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Yay, when you were standing in front of him, when you had the photos and the affidavit and everything you needed to destroy him, were you scared?" Vivian thought about it, really thought about it, the way you think about a question that deserves more than a reflex. "No," she said, "and that is what scared me." "What do you mean?" "I mean, for 7 years I was afraid of him, not physically, not always, but afraid of his disapproval, his silence, his ability to make me feel like I was the one who was wrong. He had this way of, when you are in a room and someone adjusts the thermostat so gradually that you don't realize you are freezing until you can't feel your hands. That is what it was like. He lowered the temperature so slowly that by the time I noticed, I'd already gone numb." She paused outside. A truck pulled into the rest stop, its headlights sweeping across the windshield like a searchlight. But tonight, standing in front of him, I wasn't cold anymore. I wasn't numb. I was present, completely, terrifyingly present. And he looked at me and I realized he was the one who was afraid. He was afraid because I wasn't performing anymore, and he didn't know what to do with a version of me he hadn't directed. Claire was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That is the most powerful thing I've ever heard you say. It is the most powerful thing I've ever felt." They sat in the rest stop for another 10 minutes. Claire bought 2 coffees from a vending machine that tasted like regret and hot water. They drank them anyway, then they got back on the highway and drove the rest of the way to Maine in a comfortable silence that felt like the first page of something new. They arrived at Margot's house at 1:23 in the morning. The porch light was on, the front door was unlocked, and Margot was sitting at the kitchen table with a pot of tea and a plate of shortbread cookies and the expression of a woman who had not slept and had no intention of sleeping until she knew her niece was home. "Well," Margot said. Vivian sat down across from her. Claire hovered in the doorway, unsure of her welcome, until Margot pointed at the chair beside Vivian and said, "Sit, eat. You look like you've been driving for 4 hours on vending machine coffee." "We have," Claire said. "Then you need shortbread more than anyone I've ever met." They ate, they drank tea. And Vivian told the story, all of it. From the moment she walked into the ballroom to the moment Serena unclasped the bracelet and walked out. She told it carefully, precisely, the way you tell a story that you need to get right, because the telling is part of the healing. Margot listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around her mug, her eyes steady. When Vivian finished, Margot was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took Vivian's hand. "Your father would have been proud of you," she said. "He would have been terrified. He would have been both. That is what pride is. Terror that someone you love is brave enough to do the thing you couldn't." Vivian squeezed her aunt's hand. Claire looked away, blinking hard, pretending to be interested in the pattern on the shortbread. "What happens now?" Margot asked. "Now the lawyer takes over. Claire's firm is handling the identity theft case pro bono. Apparently, it is the kind of case that makes careers. The DA's office is already interested, and I have a meeting with a forensic accountant on Tuesday to go through the joint accounts. And Tyler? Tyler is going to have a very bad month, possibly a very bad year. The organization has already been notified. Claire sent the documentation to the board chair tonight. By tomorrow morning, every person who shook Serena's hand, thinking she was me, will know the truth." "And the woman, Serena?" Vivian paused. This was the part she'd been turning over in her mind for the entire drive, the part that didn't fit neatly into the narrative of justice and reclamation, the part that complicated everything. "I don't know," she said. "She is a victim too. Not the same way I am. She made choices. She participated. She knew on some level that what she was doing was wrong. But she was also being shaped, the same way I was. He found her vulnerabilities and he used them. And by the time she realized what was happening, she'd already lost herself." "That doesn't excuse it," Claire said. It doesn't, but it explains it. And I think understanding the explanation matters, even if it doesn't change the outcome." Margot nodded slowly. "You are more generous than I would be." "I am not generous. I am just tired of being angry at the wrong people. Tyler is the architect. Serena and I are both buildings he tried to construct. The difference is that I burned mine down and she is still standing in hers. And I genuinely hope that she finds her way out before the foundation cracks." They sat in the kitchen until nearly 3 a.m. Claire fell asleep on the couch with a blanket Margot draped over her and a pillow she didn't ask for. Margot went to bed with a kiss on Vivian's forehead and a whispered "Good night, sweetheart" that sounded like a benediction. Vivian stayed up. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold and the gold bracelet she'd carried home in her purse. She turned it over in her hands, feeling its weight, studying the clasp, reading the inscription on the inside that she'd never noticed before, or maybe had noticed and chosen to forget. "V always yours, E always yours, not always mine, not I love you, not even forever. Always yours, possessive in the wrong direction. A claim disguised as a gift. Ownership wrapped in the language of devotion." She'd worn this bracelet for 3 days before she left. She'd taken it off and left it on the bathroom counter, and Tyler had picked it up and put it on someone else's wrist. And the inscription hadn't changed because it was never about the person wearing it. It was about the person who gave it. Vivian set the bracelet on the table. She looked at it for a long time. Then she got up, walked to the back porch, and threw it into the ocean. It was too dark to see where it landed. She heard the splash, small, distant, swallowed immediately by the sound of the waves. And then it was gone, somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic, settling into sand and salt and the slow, patient work of erosion. A gold bracelet with a possessive inscription was beginning the long process of becoming nothing. Vivian stood on the porch and breathed. The air was cold and tasted like salt and smelled like November and the particular kind of freedom that comes from letting go of something you should have dropped years ago. She went inside, she climbed the stairs. She got into bed in her father's room, under the quilt that smelled like lavender and old books. And she looked at the self-portrait pinned to the wall, the one with the scar and the messy hair and the eyes that had seen a fire and walked through it. And she closed her eyes. She slept without dreaming. The next 3 weeks moved with the mechanical precision of a legal process set in motion. Claire's firm filed the identity theft complaint on Monday. By Wednesday, the DA's office had opened an investigation. By Friday, a judge had issued a temporary restraining order preventing Tyler from using Vivian's name, likeness, or credentials in any capacity. The joint accounts were frozen. The apartment lease was flagged. A forensic accountant named Patricia, a small, terrifyingly competent woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in numbers the way poets speak in metaphors, began the slow, meticulous work of untangling 7 years of financial entanglement. The numbers were not good. Tyler had been methodical. Over the course of their marriage, he'd gradually shifted the financial architecture of their shared life so that everything of value was in his name and everything of liability was in hers. The apartment lease in her name, the credit cards in her name, the car loan, the insurance policies, the storage unit where he kept his wine collection, all in her name. Meanwhile, his investment accounts, his retirement fund, his brokerage portfolio, all in his name alone, funded by money that had passed through their joint accounts on its way to his private ones. He was siphoning, Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses, slowly, consistently, over years. Small transfers, 500 here, 1,000 there, always just below the threshold that would trigger a flag. By my estimate, he has moved approximately $340,000 from joint assets into accounts you had no access to. $340,000. Give or take, I am still working through the brokerage statements. Vivian sat in Patricia's office, a small, cluttered room in Portland that smelled like paper and coffee and the particular brand of justice that comes with a calculator, and felt something she hadn't expected, not anger, but clarity. The numbers confirmed what she'd always sensed, but never been able to articulate. The marriage hadn't just been emotionally exploitative. It had been financially engineered. Every dinner, every vacation, every gift, including the bracelet now rusting at the bottom of the Atlantic, had been funded with money he'd stolen from their shared life and repackaged as generosity. Can we get it back? Vivian asked. Patricia looked at her over the reading glasses. I can get you every penny. It'll take time. But the paper trail is there, and paper trails don't lie. Unlike husbands, unlike most people. In my experience, numbers are the only honest thing I've ever met. Vivian liked Patricia. The social fallout was slower but equally thorough. Claire had sent the documentation to the board chair of the Children's Literacy Alliance on the night of the gala by the following Monday. The organization had issued a statement. We have been made aware that an individual attended our events under a false identity. We take this matter seriously and are cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation. Tyler's name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. The society pages connected the dots within 48 hours. The Herald ran a piece on Thursday, not front page, page 6, the social section, where scandals among the wealthy were reported with the same detached fascination usually reserved for exotic animal escapes. The headline read, Identity Crisis. Prominent donor accused of presenting imposter as wife at charity events. The article was carefully worded, allegedly, reportedly, according to sources. But the details were specific enough to leave no doubt. Tyler Chen, the Whitfield Hotel, a woman who wasn't who she claimed to be. Claire texted Vivian a photo of the article with a single message, page 6 today. Front page by Christmas. Vivian read the article on Margot's porch, wrapped in a blanket, drinking coffee that was too hot and too strong, and exactly right. She read it twice. She felt what? Not satisfaction, not vindication. Something quieter. The feeling of a record being corrected. The feeling of truth catching up to a lie that had been running for 14 months. And finally running out of road. She put the phone down and looked at the ocean. It was a gray day. The kind of gray that Maine does better than anywhere else. A gray that isn't depressing but contemplative. The color of a sky that is thinking about something and hasn't decided yet. "You are going to wear a hole in that view," Margot said from the doorway. "It is a good view. It is the same view it was yesterday." "No, it isn't. It is never the same. That is the point." Margot came out and sat beside her. They watched the waves together, the endless, repetitive, never quite identical rhythm of water meeting shore and pulling back and meeting it again. "I got a call from the university," Vivian said. "Which university?" "Mine. The one I left, the department chair, Dr. Okafor. She saw the article. She called to say she was sorry about what happened and to ask if I'd be interested in coming back to teach. To finish my dissertation, she said the department would support a leave of absence retroactively. She said." Vivian paused, and her voice did something it hadn't done in weeks. It wavered. She said my work was too important to abandon. Margot looked at her. "What was your dissertation about?" "The economics of invisible labor. How unpaid work, caregiving, household management, emotional support gets excluded from economic models, and what happens when you account for it." "That is not a dissertation. That is your life." "I know. That is why I couldn't finish it. I was too busy living the data to analyze it. And now." Vivian looked at the ocean, the gray sky, the house behind her that smelled like salt and old wood, and the particular kind of love that doesn't ask you to be anything other than what you are. "Now I think I am ready to write it down." She set up a workspace in her father's room, the desk by the window, the one that looked out over the water. She borrowed Margot's ancient laptop, the one that took 4 minutes to boot up and made a sound like a small animal in distress every time she opened a browser. She pulled up her old files, the research, the notes, the half-finished chapters she'd abandoned 3 years ago when Tyler had suggested, gently, that perhaps academia wasn't the best use of her time. "You are so talented, Vivian, but the academic world is so small. Don't you want something bigger?" She'd believed him. She'd put the dissertation in a drawer and taken a job at his firm's nonprofit arm, a position that sounded impressive on paper and consisted primarily of writing grant proposals and attending dinners where she performed the role of Tyler's brilliant, supportive wife. She traded her own work for his vision of her work, and she'd done it so gradually that she hadn't noticed the exchange until the drawer was closed and the key was lost. Now she opened the drawer. The research was still good. The framework was still sound. The central argument that traditional economic models systematically undervalue labor performed primarily by women, and that this undervaluation has cascading effects on policy, compensation, and social structure, was, if anything, more relevant now than it had been 3 years ago. She read through her old notes and felt something she hadn't felt in years: intellectual excitement. The particular electric thrill of an idea that matters, a question worth answering, a puzzle that your mind was built to solve. She wrote for 6 hours that first day, then 8, then 10. The words came the way the painting had come. Imperfectly at first, then with increasing confidence, then with a raw, unpolished honesty that surprised her. She wasn't writing for Tyler's approval. She wasn't writing for the department's approval. She was writing because the ideas were hers, and they deserved to exist, and she was done letting someone else decide which parts of her were worth keeping. By the end of the second week, she had a complete draft of Chapter 4. The chapter she'd been stuck on for 2 years, the one about emotional labor and its economic invisibility. She sent it to Dr. Okafor with a note that said simply, "I am back. Here is where I am. Tell me what you think." Dr. Okafor responded within 3 hours. "This is the best work you've ever done. It is angry and precise and true. Don't change a word. Send me Chapter 5 when it is ready." Vivian read the email 4 times. Then she closed the laptop and went downstairs and told Margot, who opened the good whiskey even though it was 2 in the afternoon. And they toasted to Chapter 4 and to anger and precision and truth. And outside the window the ocean kept its rhythm, indifferent and eternal, and Vivian Chen sat in her father's house and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. On the 23rd day after the gala, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Vivian Chen, her real name, her real address in handwriting she didn't recognize. The return address was a P.O. box in Brooklyn. There was no name. She opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in small, careful script. "Vivian, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I am writing because I owe you the truth, and because you are the only person who would understand why the truth matters. My real name is Serena Viveros. I am 29 years old. I grew up in I moved to New York 3 years ago to work in event planning. I met Tyler at a fundraiser, not unlike the one where you found me. He was charming. He was attentive. He made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room. I know now that this is what he does. I didn't know it then. The transformation was gradual. You described it perfectly, the thermostat analogy. He lowered the temperature so slowly. I didn't notice I was freezing. First it was suggestions, then corrections, then requirements. By the time he asked me to use your name, I'd already lost mine. Not legally, emotionally. I didn't know who Serena was anymore. Vivian Chen, I know that is not an excuse. I know I participated in something that caused you real harm. I know that every time I signed your name, I was erasing you a little more. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking you to know that I see it now. What he did to both of us, and I am trying to find my way back to the person I was before he started editing me. I've left New York. I am staying with my sister in Brooklyn. I've started seeing a therapist, a real one, like you told him to find. I am not using your name anymore. I am not using anyone's name but my own. It feels strange. It feels like wearing shoes that don't quite fit. But they're mine, and I think that is the point. I hope you finish your dissertation. I hope you keep painting. I hope the ocean is as beautiful as it sounds." Serena Vivian read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the desk drawer in her father's room, next to her dissertation notes and her watercolor brushes and the self-portrait pinned to the wall. She didn't write back, not yet, maybe not ever. But she kept the letter, because it was true, and true things deserve to be kept, even when they were complicated, even when they hurt, even when they came from someone who had worn your name and your bracelet and your life, and was now, slowly, painfully, learning to wear her own. That night, Vivian sat on the back porch with Margot and watched the sun set over the Atlantic. The sky was doing something extraordinary, layers of orange and pink and deep violet, the kind of sunset that looks artificial, that looks like someone painted it with too much pigment and not enough restraint. But it was real. All of it was real, Margot Vivian said. Do you think people can really change? Not just adjust or adapt or learn to perform a different version of themselves, actually change, become someone different from who they were. Margot thought about it. She had the gift of taking questions seriously, of not rushing to fill silence with easy answers. I think people can't change who they are, she said finally. But I think they can change who they've been pretending to be. And sometimes, when you stop pretending, the person underneath is so different from the performance that it feels like change, even though it is really just arrival. Arrival. Coming home to yourself, finding the person you were before someone else started rewriting you. Vivian looked at the sunset. She thought about the woman she'd been before Tyler, the graduate student with the messy hair and the strong opinions and the laugh that was too loud for restaurants. She thought about the woman she'd been during Tyler, the polished, edited, carefully constructed wife who ordered salmon and stood up straight and smiled on command. And she thought about the woman she was now, scarred, unfinished, sitting on a porch in Maine with paint under her fingernails and a half-written dissertation and an ocean that never stopped moving. She wasn't the first woman. She couldn't go back to her. Too much had happened. Too much had been lost. Too much had been learned. And she wasn't the second woman. That version had burned in a fire she'd set herself, and the ashes were scattered across a New York apartment she'd never returned to. She was someone new, someone who contained both of those women and neither of them. Someone who was still being written, still being painted, still being shaped, but this time by her own hands. I think I am arriving, Vivian said. Margot smiled. I think you've been arriving since the moment you walked through my door. The sun finished setting. The sky darkened. The stars came out, not all at once, but gradually, one by one, like words appearing on a page, like a story being written in real time by an author who was finally telling the truth. Vivian went inside. She climbed the stairs. She sat at the desk by the window and opened the laptop and began to write. Not the dissertation, not something that had been building in her chest for weeks, pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat, demanding to be let out. She wrote the first line, the night I burned my husband's lies. I didn't know I was also burning the woman he'd made me become. And then she kept writing, number chapter 8, the woman in the red dress 6 months later. The gallery was small, 1,200 square feet on a side street in Portland, wedged between a bookshop and a bakery that made the entire block smell like sourdough and butter. The floors were old pine, sanded and sealed, but still creaking in the places where 100 years of footsteps had worn grooves into the grain. The walls were white, the lighting was warm. The windows faced east, which meant the morning light came in at an angle that made everything it touched look like it was being remembered. The gallery was called Arrival. It belonged to Vivian. Not technically it belonged to a cooperative of 4 artists who had pooled their resources and their courage and signed a lease that terrified all of them. But the name was Vivian's. She'd suggested it during their first meeting, sitting on the floor of the empty space with takeout containers and a bottle of wine. And the others had agreed immediately, the way people agree with something that sounds exactly right. The opening was scheduled for 7 o'clock on a Saturday in May. Vivian had spent the previous 3 days hanging work, adjusting lights, rearranging pieces, second-guessing everything, and being gently but firmly told by Margot to stop touching things and go take a walk. You are going to rearrange yourself into a nervous breakdown, Margot said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, and the particular expression of a woman who had raised one child and was now raising another and had no patience left for perfectionism. The light on the third piece is wrong. It is casting a shadow on the lower left corner. It changes the whole. Vivian, the light is fine, the work is fine, you are fine. Go walk by the water and come back in an hour and put on the dress and stop trying to control things that don't need controlling. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, closed it, recognized with the wry self-awareness that had become her most reliable companion that the impulse to obsessively adjust every detail until it met an impossible standard was not artistic integrity. It was a habit, a scar, the ghost of a man who had spent 7 years teaching her that nothing was ever quite good enough. "You are right," she said. "I know I am right. I've been right since October. Go." Vivian went. She walked to the waterfront. Portland's harbor in May was a different creature than the winter ocean she'd grown accustomed to in Cape Elizabeth, busier, louder, full of boats and tourists, and the aggressive optimism of a New England spring. But the water was the same, the smell was the same, the sound was the same, that constant, rhythmic conversation between the sea and the shore, the oldest dialogue in the world, still going, still unresolved, still somehow comforting in its refusal to reach a conclusion. She sat on a bench and looked at the harbor and took inventory. 6 months. In 6 months, she had filed for divorce. The proceedings were ongoing. Tyler had hired an expensive lawyer who was very good at delays. But Patricia, the forensic accountant, was better at numbers, and the numbers didn't lie. The joint accounts had been unfrozen, audited, and divided. The apartment lease had been transferred. The $340,000, which turned out to be closer to $410,000. Once Patricia finished with the brokerage statements, was the subject of a civil suit that Claire's firm was pursuing with the quiet, relentless energy of people who knew they were going to win and were in no hurry to do it. Completed her dissertation, all 7 chapters, plus an introduction and a conclusion that Dr. Okafor had called the most compelling argument for economic reform I've read in 20 years. The defense was scheduled for June. Vivian was terrified and ready, which she now understood were the same thing. Painted 31 pieces, watercolors mostly, but also acrylics, and 3 large mixed media works that combined paint and text and fragments of documents, old tax returns, credit card statements, the lease agreement with her name on it, layered and collaged into images that were part portrait, part evidence, part exorcism. The series was called Invisible Labor, and it was the work she'd hung in the gallery, and it was the most honest thing she'd ever made. Written a memoir, or the beginning of one. The manuscript that had started as a single line on a November night. The night I burned my husband's lies, I didn't know I was also burning the woman he'd made me become, had grown into something larger, something with chapters and structure, and a narrative arc that she was still discovering. She hadn't shown it to anyone except Claire, who had read the first 50 pages and called her at midnight to say, "This is going to help people. This is going to save people. Don't you dare stop." She hadn't stopped, started therapy. Every Tuesday at 10, with a woman named Dr. Lena Vasquez, who had an office in Portland that smelled like eucalyptus and who had a gift for asking questions that sounded simple and turned out to be demolition charges placed at the foundation of everything Vivian thought she knew about herself. Why do you think you stayed? What did you believe you deserved? When was the last time you made a decision without wondering what someone else would think of it? The answers came slowly, painfully, in layers like paint on canvas, each one covering and revealing at the same time. Vivian learned things about herself that she hadn't known, or had known and buried, which was worse. She learned that her need for approval wasn't ambition, but fear. She learned that the woman Tyler had built wasn't entirely his creation. He'd found the raw materials already there. The insecurities and the doubts and the desperate childhood deep need to be good enough, and he'd simply organized them into a shape that served him. Understanding this didn't make it hurt less, but it made the hurt useful. It turned pain into information, and information into power, and power into the slow, daily, unglamorous work of becoming a person who didn't need anyone else's permission to exist. She was still becoming. She suspected she always would be. But the direction had changed. She was building now, and the architect was her. She walked back to the gallery at 6. The sun was low and golden, casting long shadows down the street, turning the brick buildings amber and the windows into mirrors. The bakery next door was closing up. She could smell the last batch of bread cooling, and the bookshop owner, a man named Gerald who wore bow ties and spoke exclusively in literary references, was arranging a window display of books about art. "Big night," Gerald said, catching her eye through the glass. "Terrifying night." All the best nights are. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Camus. Thank you, Gerald. You are welcome. I'll be there at 7 with a bottle of wine and extremely strong opinions about your use of negative space. Vivian laughed, the real laugh, the loud one, the one that Tyler had spent years trying to soften, and went inside. The gallery looked different in the evening light. The morning's anxiety had faded, and what was left was the work itself, hanging on white walls, lit by warm bulbs, waiting to be seen. 31 pieces, 6 months of labor, a lifetime of material. She walked through the space slowly, looking at each piece the way a stranger would, not as the artist who knew every brushstroke and every revision, but as someone encountering these images for the first time. The first piece was the self-portrait, the one she'd painted in November in her father's room, with the scar and the messy hair and the eyes that looked directly at the viewer, with an expression that was not quite defiance and not quite peace, but something in between. She'd reworked it twice since then, adding depth to the shadows, sharpening the line of the jaw, adjusting the color of the background from gray to a deep oceanic blue that made the figure seem to emerge from water. It was the first piece visitors would see when they walked in, and it was the piece she was most afraid of, because it was the most naked, the most unprotected, the most her. The middle section was the Invisible Labor series, 12 pieces, each one built around a different document: a tax return, a credit card statement, a lease agreement, a bank transfer record, a wedding invitation, a grocery list, a to-do list, a calendar page filled with appointments that were all for other people. The documents were layered beneath paint, visible in fragments like bones beneath skin. Over them, Vivian had painted figures, women mostly, but not always, engaged in the invisible work of maintaining a life, cooking, cleaning, organizing, remembering, anticipating, absorbing, endure. The figures were rendered in watercolor, translucent and luminous, as if they were made of light. The documents beneath them were rendered in sharp, precise detail, as if they were made of stone. The effect was haunting. The women glowed. The paperwork anchored them. You could see both at once: the beauty of the labor and the weight of it, the grace and the grind, the invisible made visible through the simple act of looking closely enough. The final section was new work. Pieces she'd completed in the last month, after the dissertation was done and the legal proceedings were underway and the therapy was starting to take hold. These were different, looser, brighter, less controlled, abstract landscapes that might have been oceans, or might have been skies, or might have been the interior of a mind that was finally, after years of compression, expanding. They were imperfect. They were unfinished in places. They were, Vivian thought, the most beautiful things she'd ever made, precisely because she'd stopped trying to make them perfect. She stood in front of the last piece, a large canvas 4 feet by 3, painted in shades of blue and gold and a deep burning red that she'd mixed herself from cadmium and alizarin, and a color she couldn't name but recognized as the exact shade of the dress she'd worn to the gala. The painting had no title. She'd left the placard blank because some things resist language, and this was one of them. It was a painting about freedom, but the word freedom was too small. It was a painting about survival, but survival was too clinical. It was a painting about becoming, and becoming was close but not quite right, because becoming implies a destination. And this painting was about the journey itself, the messy, terrifying, exhilarating process of turning into someone you've never been before and discovering that she was there all along, waiting, patient, underneath. "It is good," said a voice behind her. Vivian turned. Claire was standing in the doorway, holding 2 garment bags and wearing an expression that was trying to be casual and failing spectacularly. "You are early," Vivian said. "I am always early. You know this about me. I brought options." She held up the garment bags, black or red. Red. Obviously red. "I don't know why I brought the black habit, I guess, old programming." We're all recovering from old programming. Some of us faster than others. Come on, let's get you dressed. People are going to start arriving in 45 minutes, and you have paint in your hair. At 7 o'clock, the doors opened. Vivian stood near the entrance in the red dress, not the same one from the gala, but a new one, chosen by her for her, without consultation or approval or the invisible weight of someone else's aesthetic. It was simpler than the gala dress, a line, knee-length cotton, the kind of red that doesn't shout but doesn't whisper either. She wore flat shoes. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was down, unstyled, still slightly damp from the shower she'd taken 20 minutes ago. She looked, she thought, like exactly who she was, a woman who had made something and was brave enough to show it to the world. The first person through the door was Gerald, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a bow tie patterned with tiny books. Behind him came a couple she didn't recognize, then a group of students from the art school downtown, then a woman with silver hair who turned out to be a critic from the Portland Press-Herald and who spent 45 minutes in front of the Invisible Labor series without saying a word. Then came the people she knew. Margot arrived at 7:15, wearing a blue dress and the pearl earrings that had belonged to Vivian's mother, the real ones, the ones that had never been stolen, the ones that Margot had kept in a jewelry box for 20 years and given to Vivian on her birthday in March, with a note that said, "These belong to someone who loved you before anyone else did. Wear them when you are ready." Vivian wasn't wearing them tonight. She'd decided they were too precious for a crowded gallery, but she'd put them in her purse, close to her body where she could feel their weight. Claire arrived at 7:20, having changed into a green dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a painting herself. She brought 3 colleagues from her firm, all of whom immediately gravitated toward the document-based pieces and began having an animated conversation about the legal implications of using financial records as art materials. Dr. Okafor arrived at 7:30, having driven up from Boston. She was a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around her. She walked through the gallery slowly, methodically, the way she read dissertations, with complete attention and no visible reaction until she'd taken in the whole. When she reached the end, she turned to Vivian and said, "Your dissertation is brilliant, but this is better. This is the argument your dissertation is trying to make, rendered in a language that doesn't need footnotes. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank yourself." you did the work. By 8 o'clock, the gallery was full. 60 people, maybe 70, moving through the space with glasses of wine and the particular energy of an opening night, part celebration, part evaluation, part the simple human pleasure of being in a room full of beautiful things. Vivian moved among them, answering questions, accepting compliments, explaining her process when asked and deflecting when the question. She was learning the difference between sharing and exposing, between opening a door and removing a wall. Some things were for the work, some things were for her. At 8:30, she stepped outside for air. The street was quiet, the bakery was dark. Gerald's bookshop glowed softly, its window display illuminated by a single lamp. The sky was the deep blue of late spring. Not quite dark, not quite light. The color of a day that is not ready to end. Vivian leaned against the brick wall and breathed. She thought about the woman who had stood in a burning apartment 7 months ago, watching 7 years of lies turn to ash. She thought about the woman who had driven to Maine with nothing but a suitcase and a scar, and the fragile, untested belief that she deserved to exist on her own terms. She thought about the woman who had walked across a ballroom in a red dress and reclaimed her name from a stranger who was wearing it. She thought about the woman who had thrown a gold bracelet into the Atlantic and sat at a desk and written the first true sentence of her life. She thought about all the women she had been, and all the women she had refused to be, and all the women she was still becoming. And she thought about her father. He had died in the house in Cape Elizabeth, in the room where Vivian now slept and worked and painted. Margot had told her the story, how he'd been sick for a long time, how he'd refused treatment near the end, how he'd spent his last week sitting by the window, looking at the ocean, reading poetry, and writing letters he never sent. After he died, Margot had found the letters in his desk drawer. Most were to old friends, colleagues, people from a life he'd lived before illness had narrowed his world to a single room and a single view. But one was to Vivian. Margot had given it to her in January, on a night when the snow was falling and the house was quiet, and Vivian was sitting at the desk where her father had sat, struggling with a chapter that wouldn't come together. "He wrote this for you," Margot said. "I was saving it for the right time. I think this is the right time." The letter was short, her father's handwriting, small, precise, the handwriting of an engineer who believed in accuracy, filled less than half a page. "My dear Vivian, I am writing this knowing I won't be here to say it in person, which is the coward's way, but I've never been as brave as you. You got your courage from your mother. I got my caution from my father. Between the two of us, you ended up with exactly the right amount of both. I want to tell you something I should have told you every day of your life. You are enough. Not because of what you achieve or what you become or who you marry or what you build. You are enough because you exist, because you are my daughter. Because the world is better for having you in it, exactly as you are, without adjustment or improvement or anyone else's editorial. I know I wasn't always good at showing this. I know I was quiet when I should have been loud, and careful when I should have been fierce, and absent when I should have been present. I know I let you down in ways I can't undo, but I want you to know that every time I looked at you, I saw someone extraordinary, not someone who needed to be shaped or corrected or perfected, someone who was. Be yourself. Vivian, whoever that turns out to be, I promise you, she is worth knowing. All my love, Dad. Vivian had read the letter and cried for an hour. Then she'd put it in the desk drawer next to Serena's letter and her dissertation notes and her watercolor brushes, and she'd gone back to work. And the chapter had come together, and she'd understood, not intellectually, but in her body, in her bones. In the place where understanding lives before language can reach it, that the voice she'd been searching for had been hers all along. She went back inside. The gallery was still full. The wine was flowing. Gerald was holding court near the abstract landscapes, delivering a monologue about color theory that was equal parts insightful and theatrical. Claire was talking to the Press Herald critic, who was taking notes. Dr. Okafor was examining the self-portrait with the focused intensity of someone reading a primary source. Margot was standing in front of the last piece, the untitled one, the large canvas in blue and gold and red. She was standing very still, her hands clasped in front of her, her head tilted slightly to the left, and she was crying, not visibly unless you were looking closely. But the tears were there, running down her face in quiet lines, and she wasn't wiping them away. Vivian walked over and stood beside her. "It is beautiful," Margot said. "It is unfinished. The best things are." They stood together in front of the painting, the aunt and the niece, the woman who had opened her door and the woman who had walked through it, and they looked at the canvas that was about freedom and survival and becoming and all the words that were close but not quite right. And they didn't try to name it because some things are bigger than their names. And this was one of them. "Your father would have loved this," Margot said. "I know. He would have stood right here in this exact spot, and he would have looked at this painting and he would have said, 'That is my daughter.' Yes, that is exactly what he would have said." Vivian put her arm around Margot's shoulders. Margot put her arm around Vivian's waist. They stood like that for a long time. Two women holding each other up in a room full of art and light and the particular kind of beauty that comes from telling the truth about your life and discovering that the truth, despite everything, is worth looking at. The opening ended at 10. The last guest trickled out into the May night, carrying the warmth of the gallery with them like a borrowed coat. Claire left with a hug and a promise to call tomorrow. Dr. Okafor left with a handshake and a reminder about the dissertation defense in June. Gerald left with an empty wine bottle and a declaration that Vivian's use of negative space was audacious, bordering on reckless, and exactly right. Margot left last. She stood in the doorway, her coat over her arm, and looked at Vivian with an expression that contained everything she'd ever felt about this woman. The worry and the pride and the love and the grief and the fierce, unshakable belief that Vivian Chen was going to be okay. "Come home when you are ready," Margot said. "I will. Don't stay too late." "I won't." And Vivian, "Yeah? I am proud of you. Not for the gallery, not for the art, not for the dissertation, or the lawyer, or the gala, or any of it. I am proud of you for being here, for still being here, for choosing to still be here every day when it would have been so much easier to disappear." Vivian's eyes burned. She blinked. She didn't look away. "Thank you for not letting me disappear," she said. Margot smiled. She touched Vivian's cheek. Once briefly, the way you touch something precious. And then she walked out into the night, and Vivian was alone. She stood in the empty gallery. The wine glasses were on the counter, waiting to be washed. The guest book was open on the table by the door, filled with names and comments she would read tomorrow. The art hung on the walls, quiet now, no longer performing for an audience, just existing. Paint on canvas, color on paper, the visible evidence of a woman who had decided to stop being invisible. Vivian walked through the space one last time. She stopped at each piece. She looked at the self-portrait with the scar and the messy hair. She looked at the Invisible Labor series with its glowing women and its anchoring documents. She looked at the abstract landscapes that might have been oceans or skies or the interior of a mind learning to expand. And she looked at the last piece, the untitled one, the one in blue and gold and red, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. In the lower right corner, almost hidden in the layers of paint, there was a shape. She hadn't planned it. She hadn't painted it deliberately. It had emerged the way things emerge in art sometimes, unbidden, unconscious, the hand knowing something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. It was small, abstract, but unmistakable. Once you saw it, it was a door. Open. Vivian looked at it for a long time. Then she smiled. Not the polished smile, not the performance smile, but the real one. The one that started in her chest and moved outward like light. And she turned off the gallery lights, and she locked the door, and she stepped out. The air was warm. The stars were out. Somewhere nearby, the ocean was doing what it always did. Moving, breathing, arriving and departing and arriving again, the same and never the same, endlessly becoming. Vivian Chen walked down the street toward the water. She walked the way she painted, without a plan, without permission, without the weight of someone else's expectation. She walked like a woman who had burned her old life to the ground and built a new one from the ashes, and discovered that the new one, imperfect and unfinished and entirely her own, was more beautiful than anything she'd been given. She walked like a woman who had arrived, and behind her, in a small gallery on a side street in Portland, 31 paintings hung in the warm light, telling the story of a woman who had lost her name and found it again, who had been erased and rewritten herself, who had been shaped by other hands and learned, finally, to hold the brush. The gallery was called Arrival. The artist was Viv, and the door in the painting was open. Let me tell you what this story is actually about. It is not about a cheating husband. It is not even about identity theft, though. Yes, that happened, and yes, it is a federal offense, and yes, Tyler deserves every legal consequence heading his way. This story is about a man who loved a woman so much he built her twice, except he didn't love a woman. He loved a blueprint. Vivian was version 1, the prototype he spent 7 years refining. The haircut, the lipstick, the posture, the salmon order, the smile calibrated for public consumption. When version 1 developed the inconvenient feature of independent thought and walked out, he didn't mourn. He recruited. Serena was version 2, same specs, updated packaging. And here is the detail that keeps me up at night, the nickname. Viv. He called Vivian that from the beginning. She thought it was intimacy. It was inventory labeling. Serena Viveros Viv, Vivian Viv. He wasn't shortening her name. He was filing her under the same category, same shelf, same product line. But the real turning point isn't the gala. It is not the red dress or the photographs or the legal takedown. The real turning point is a woman sitting on a porch in Maine with a blank notebook, writing, "I like the sound of the ocean at night." One sentence, her own, not approved, not shaped by anyone else's hands.